Hello, I'm Jason Lowe, Head of eTAPS. Welcome back to our Payday Super videos. In the first video, we looked at Payday, which means in this video, we have to look at Super. The biggest change to Super is how we report it in STP. At the moment, you have choices. Right now, you can choose to report either Super liability, or instead, you might choose to report your ordinary time earnings. Or there's actually a third option where you can report Super liability and ordinary time earnings. What we know from the ATO, however, is that most people just report Super liability. But it's important for you to go away and check what you're reporting at the moment, so you know what you need to change moving forward. Once Payday Super starts on 1 July 2026, we're going to have to report two fields, and everybody must report both of these fields. The first field is Super liability, and the second field is a new field called QE, which stands for qualifying earnings. Let's take a look at what both of these fields mean. Starting with Super liability. Super liability is the total amount of superannuation you are paying for an employee. It's the total amount of super across all legal sources. So the most common legal source is the ATO, the definition of ordinary time earnings under the super guarantee rules. It says how much super you have to pay, and you will continue to report that super. But in super liability, we look at all the other sources. So you might have some rules in your award or EBA, for example. Here's a classic example. You may have negotiated an EBA which says we're going to pay super on overtime. Now, under the ATO rules, you don't need to pay super on overtime. But if your EBA says that you have to, then you will include that in your total super liability. You might have rules in your employment contract or company policy. So, for example, your business might be really generous and pay 13% super for everyone. You've made a promise in either the contract or the company policy to pay 13% super. That's what you must pay. You work out super at 13% and you include that here in super liability. And then finally, there might be some other legislative areas that you have to pay super for. And I'm thinking primarily in Victoria, they have those workers' compensation laws, which says once somebody has been off on workers' compensation for more than 12 months, you have to start paying superannuation for that person. So there might be laws that say you have to pay super. Regardless of why you're paying it, if you're paying super, you need to include it here in your super liability. Let's compare this field to the new field that we've got to report, QE, or qualifying earnings. Qualifying earnings is just your ATO super obligation. So you need to go to the ATO website and say, right, under the ATO rules, what does the ATO say I need to pay super on? And that's what you need to include in QE. So it's made up primarily of four things. Ordinary time earnings, just like we've been doing before. We've all been paying super on ordinary time earnings, and that continues. It also says you have to pay it on all commissions. We'll look at that in a moment. It also says you have to pay it on salary sacrifice to super, and we've been doing that since 2020 anyhow. If somebody's salary sacrificing to super, you need to pay super on that amount. The ATO are currently working on some guidelines around how salary sacrifice might work under Payday Super, and when they become available, we'll probably do a special video just on salary sacrifice. And then finally, we've got payments to contractors, and this one's a little misleading. We saw in the last video that contractors now fall into the world of Payday Super. So if you have a contractor who is employed primarily for their labour, you need to include them for Payday Super. They need to get their super at the same time you pay their invoice. So the ATO have been putting that all over the place on the ATO website, reminding you that contractors are now part of the scope for Payday Super. For this particular slide, it's a little bit misleading. I want to stress, and we spoke about this in the last video, that although you have to pay super on payday for your contractors, there is no legal obligation to report contractors in your STP file. You can do it if you choose, but you don't have to. And the way I always remember it is STP stands for single touch payroll, not single touch contractors. So although you can report it in there, you don't have to. So what that really means is there are three things that we need to focus on here in terms of QE: ordinary time earnings, all commissions, and salary sacrifice to super. How do we do that? So on the ATO website, they have this brand new page which says what payments are qualifying earnings. What is QE? And of course, once again, I look at this page, it's got that little warning. Every page has got that warning on it. Some regulations and laws for Payday Super are still being considered by Parliament. So some of this information may change. We might get more information a little bit later. So keep your eyes and ears open for things that might change as we go along. So here's, when you scroll down, here's what it looks like. We'll have a list of payments and it will tell us whether it is OTE and whether it is qualifying earnings. So really all we need to do is go through this table and figure out, is something qualifying earnings, yes or no? Now you'll notice it's got both columns and there's a reason behind that. If you look at the table, the OTE column and the qualifying earnings column is exactly the same for every type of payment except one. And I've highlighted it here at the top of the page. At the moment, under the OTE rules, commissions solely for work performed entirely outside of ordinary hours is not OTE. But from 1 July 2026, when qualifying earnings begin, those payments will be qualifying earnings. So that is a change. So that is why the ATO said that qualifying earnings is made up of ordinary time earnings and all commissions. They're highlighting to you to the fact that they have changed the rules for commissions. So now all commissions, whether it's work during normal time or overtime, it is all going to be superable from 1 July 2026. So keep an eye open for that. You might want to just double check the way you set up your commission payments. Now, it's interesting. They've changed the rules for commission payments, but they have not changed the rules for bonuses. So the way bonuses work, pretty much every bonus is superable. Performance bonus, Christmas bonus, sign-on bonus, referral bonus, all bonuses are subject to super. There is one bonus that is not subject to super, and that is a bonus solely for work performed entirely outside of ordinary hours. And that remains as is. It's not changing. So what's that one all about? You may have an employee who works all weekend to finish a project. As a thank you to them, we say, look, thank you so much for working all weekend on this project. We had a very important deadline. You've put in the work. Here is a $500 bonus for you. That bonus represents a thank you for working all weekend, which ordinarily would have been overtime. But maybe because this person is on a salary, they're not entitled to overtime. So we're giving them a bonus instead. That bonus is really an overtime payment. And so the ATO says, since overtime is not superable, if this bonus is entirely for overtime work, it will also not be superable. So that rule remains the same. It is only the commissions that are changing. Otherwise, this table is going to become your best friend. You can scroll through it up and down to your heart's content and figure out whether your payments are QE or not. So let's put this all together into a real life example of what you're going to have to do in terms of setting up for Payday Super. So in this example, it says Damon earns $1,000 per week and his employment contract provides for super at 13%. So he works for a really nice employer. They're paying extra super, more than they need to, an extra 1%. What we have a list here is all the components of Damon's pay. This isn't his STP report. This is just the components of his pay. So it starts off with some normal time. He did 4 days of normal time, which was worth $800. He did 1 day of jury duty, which was worth $200. He did some overtime worth $75, and he received a commission payment worth $350. Now, once you've got your list of pay codes, you need to figure out, is it super liability and is it QE? And here's what I would be doing for every single pay code in your system. As you go through each one, start with super liability. Do I have to pay super on this, yes or no? And I would make a little note on your Excel spreadsheet or on your printout. Why am I paying super on this? So let's do it together for this little example. So we've got 4 days worth of normal time. Do I have to pay super on that? Yes, absolutely. I've always had to pay super on normal time. But why? Oh, it's because it's under the ATO rules. The ATO says you have to pay super on normal time. So I'm going to say, yes, this is a super liability because the ATO rules tell me that it is. Then jury duty. Do I need to pay super on jury duty? In my case, it is yes. Now, strictly speaking, under the ATO rules, there is no obligation to pay super on jury duty. However, in my award, there is a clause, and many of you will have a similar clause in your award, which says if the employee receives any form of paid leave, then you must pay super on it. So although the ATO says no, the award says yes, this is superable. Jury duty is a form of paid leave. I need to pay super on it. So I'm going to say, yes, I have a super liability here, and that liability exists because the award says I have to pay super. So I'm going to write down, yes, it's an award entitlement. So you're going to need to start thinking about not only what does the ATO say, but is this in my award? Is this in my enterprise agreement? Is this in my employment contract? You're going to need to break down why you are paying super and what the legislative source is. Let's continue. Overtime. Do we need to pay super on overtime? No, it's never been superable under the ATO rules. I've got no special rules in my award or enterprise agreement. I'm going to leave that as a no. And then finally, commission. Do I need to pay super on commission? Yes, I do. The ATO says that all commission payments are subject to super. So I'm going to put a yes on that. So in my super liability, what I can now do is add up all my yeses, $800 for normal, plus $200 for jury duty. That's $1,000. $350 for commission. That gives me $1,350. And you may recall here in this example, I pay Damon super at 13% because it's in his employment contract. So what I do is I get that 1,350, I times it by 13%, and that says my total super liability is $175.50. That is what I report as super liability. My total liability for super for Damon is $175.50. I've done that first column. Now I need to work out whether these payments are QE or not. And remember, QE is defined as only the things the ATO require us to pay super on. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that list of QE and figure out whether each of these items are superable or not. Let's do that together now. Normal time. I said before, I'm paying that because it's an ATO obligation. ATO obligations are QE, so it's a yes for QE. Jury duty. When I look at that list, do I need to pay super on jury duty? No, the ATO says no, I don't. So it is not QE. Overtime, do I need to pay super on that? No, I don't. Commission, yes, I do pay super on that because the ATO tells me I have to, so that makes it QE. So of those payments, only 2 of them are QE. And for QE, what we do is we add them up. We get $800 plus we get $350 for the commission. The QE is $1,150. Now, in the background, the ATO will see that $1,150 and go, right, those are the qualifying earnings. Those are the earnings which qualify for super. And what the ATO will do in the background is they'll get that $1,150. They will times it by 12%, and they know that your ATO obligation for super is $138. But we don't actually report the $138. The ATO does that math in the background. We report $1,150. So you can see in this example straight away that there is a difference. My super liability worked out to be $175.50, but the QE amount is $1,150, which results in a super that is owed of $138. You can see they are vastly different figures, but that's the way it's going to need to be reported under the new system. So the question becomes why? Why do we have to report QE? And it all comes down to the fact that the ATO has done some research and they have realized that each year about $6 billion in super is unpaid. And they want to make sure that those employees are getting that $6 billion worth of super. However, here's the problem. The ATO only has authority to enforce the laws about ATO super. They can't enforce other laws. So if we go back to that example, Damon is paid 13% super. Can the ATO enforce that law? No. That's an agreement between me and Damon. I've agreed to pay the 13%. The ATO can't enforce those rules. The only rules the ATO can enforce are the rules which relate to basically ordinary time earnings, or what it will now be known as qualifying earnings. So what they are interested in, they want to see what the total super liability is, but they also want to split out and see just what you have to pay based on your ATO obligations, because that is what the ATO can control. And the way super works now, and it's going to get even smarter under Payday Super, is they are watching to make sure that you have paid all your super. So the way it works now is we report our super liability, and when we upload our STP file to the ATO, they can see how much super needs to be paid. After we've uploaded our STP file to the ATO, we then send the money and the data to the clearinghouse, and all that money is dispersed off to the funds. Here's what the funds do. When the funds receive the money, they then report to the ATO what they have actually received. So the ATO knows how much you were supposed to pay, and then they get a report from the super fund saying how much you've actually paid, and the ATO can cross-match that and check that you're paying the right amount of super. Now, at the moment, because it's done quarterly and there's a time gap and it's a little bit clunky, one of the massive benefits for Payday Super moving forward for the ATO is they're going to see it on a pay period by pay period basis. They will get our STP report and go, right, Jason said he is paying super worth $20,000 for all his employees. Within 7 days, the super funds will have received that money, and then they will send a report to the ATO saying, here's how much super we have received from Jason as an employer. And they'll be able to match that and go, right, Jason said he had to pay $20,000. The super funds have said they've received $20,000. That balances. If it doesn't balance, the ATO will be able to go down and look at it at an employee by employee basis and go, oh, this employee wasn't paid, this employee wasn't paid, that employee wasn't paid. But all they can enforce are the ATO obligations. So they will send you a letter saying, oh, we can see you haven't paid your ATO super. Here's how much should have been paid. If you can't prove that you have paid it, then there are going to be fines and penalties. And they will use what we have reported as the basis for calculating those fines and penalties. So it's going to be really, really important that we get that QE figure right, because that is what the ATO will be checking that you have paid, and that is what they'll be using to work out your fines and penalties for not paying the appropriate amount of super. So very, very important that we split these things out correctly and report both of them correctly. So what are our action items right now? What I would be doing is I would be printing out a list of every single pay type or pay code in your payroll system, and I would be assessing each one individually. And there are two questions you need to ask yourself. Do I have a super liability for this? From anywhere, from the ATO rules, from our company policy, from our contracts, from our awards, from our EBAs. Do I have to pay super on this pay type at all? Yes or no? Then you need to go through the list again and highlight just the ones that are QE. So looking at that QE list on the ATO website, go through and say, right, is this item on the QE list? Is this an ATO obligation? Yes or no? And record that. And I would be doing that over the next couple of months. So you know for each single pay code, is it super liability? Is it QE? At some point, your payroll software provider will reach out to you and say, right, we've updated our system. we're now ready for you to go in and start updating each pay code and record whether it's a super liability or whether it's QE. So my advice is start doing that now so that when your payroll software is ready, you'll be ready to update the system.
Hold on, stop the video. What do you mean we have to wait for our payroll software? Here's the problem with Payday Super. Just like I've been waiting for all the rules and regulations before I could begin training, the payroll software providers have been waiting for all the rules and regulations before they started building their payroll solutions. So right now, they are really busy getting everything together. What that means in the real world is you're probably not going to have a solution available until sometime in May. So reach out to your payroll software provider and ask them when they are likely to be ready. But that doesn't mean you should be sitting around and doing nothing. Those action items we just talked about are still really, really important. Print out your list of every pay code and work through. Is this super liability? Is this OTE? Now, this is where I was going to end the video, but I'm going to throw in one more thing. You know, I said I'm waiting on the answers to a few things. What I wanted to do now was share with you one of the things that I am still waiting to hear from the ATO about.
Take a look at this example, and it's very similar to the one we looked at before. So the first thing I've done is I've listed the components that I'm paying. I've got some company paid parental leave worth $1,000, and I've also got an industry allowance of $250. So the first thing I'm going to go do is for my pay items, I'm going to figure out, is this a super liability and why? So company paid parental leave. I'm going to go and look at the ATO website here, and I've got that down on the bottom left-hand corner. Is employer paid parental leave QE? No, it is not. However, I know I'm covered by an award, and in my award, it's got that little clause which says, if the employee receives any type of paid leave, then you need to pay super on it. So although there's no ATO obligation, once again, there is an award obligation here that I have to pay super on this company paid parental leave. So I'm going to report, yes, I have to pay super on this because my award says so. Then I've also got an industry allowance I'm giving to this particular employee. And as I come up with my rules for my company paid parental leave, I wanted the employee to get everything they were going to get had they have been at work. And normally they'd have got their normal time and they'd have got their industry allowance. So I'm going to continue to pay the industry allowance while they're on company paid parental leave. That's on me. That's the decision I made. So do I need to pay super on it? Yeah, look, I'm going to pay it. I decided that this is what we wanted the employee to get. I wanted them to get everything that they were going to get had they been at work. And I'm also going to extend that off to super. So based on my company policy, I'm going to pay super on that. So yes, good. I'm happy with that. So for me, both of those items have a super liability. One because of the award, one because of my company policy. But the question is it QE? Let's go and take a look. So we've looked at that table already, and we know that the company paid parental leave is not QE. Put a no on that. What about industry allowance? I go to that list on the ATO website, scroll down to allowances, and actually I can see industry allowance is on there. And is it qualifying earnings? Yes, it is. So I put a yes on that. And as I put a yes on that and I look at this, to me, it doesn't logically make sense. If I'm not paying super on the company paid, if the company paid parental leave is not QE, why is the industry allowance QE? It doesn't make sense. They're not working. They're on unpaid parental leave. I'm giving them some extra payments out of the goodness of my heart. Why is that industry allowance? Why is just the industry allowance QE? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And it's actually a question that is floating around. People are asking that question. In fact, it was even on LinkedIn. My friend Deanne Windsor has been trying to get an answer to this, and she hasn't been able to get an answer. So she put it as a poll on LinkedIn to see what everyone else thinks. So here's what she asked. She said, if an employer paid an allowance that is OTE, and we did that. We paid an allowance that was OTE. We paid industry allowance, and industry allowance is OTE. But we paid that allowance for a period of absence that is not OTE, which is exactly what we did. company paid parental leave is not OTE, it's not QE. The question is, how would you treat that allowance? And here's what people thought. 52% of people said the allowance remains OTE. I've looked it up on the QE list. It says I've got to pay super on it. I'm paying super on it because that's what it says on the list. Then there are other people that say, well, it doesn't make sense. If they're not at work, if they're not doing any ordinary work, why would the allowance be subject to QE? So 28% of people said, no, I don't think the allowance is OTE. And then 19% of people said, I don't know. Now, I have an opinion. It is just an opinion. It's not based on any fact, but having read the superannuation rules and see how they apply it, my opinion is the allowance is not OTE. But I'm in the majority. Only 28% of people think like me. And here's the frustrating part. We don't know the answer. There is a differing opinion in the market. Everyone's got a different idea about what to do here. Now, I told you how important it was to report your QE correctly. Little questions like this are popping up all over the place. Oh, should I pay QE on this? Should I not pay QE on this? We don't have an answer. Even when the ATO give us an answer, we'll certainly share that with you if we can. But it makes it a little bit hard. But don't let this stop you. You still need to be able to sit down and go through your allowances. You can probably figure it out for 99% of your allowances and your pay codes, but there are going to be a couple there that you're not entirely sure about. And hopefully we'll get the answer later. But for now, I guess we're just going to have to wait.
So that's it. That is the end of our video. I am so sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger. Now, who knows when and if we'll get an answer from the ATO. But once again, I've said it once, I've said it twice, I'm going to say it again. Don't let these little things hold you back. What have you got to do now? Print out your list of pay codes. Is it subject to super? Is it QE? Have all that ready to go so that when your payroll software is finally ready, you can go in and update it and be ready for the new financial year. I'll see you in the next video.